Okay, this is going to be a reading of Romanism, Its Aims and Tendencies. The full name is Wide Awake! Romanism, Its Aims and Tendencies. The Sentiments of a quote-unquote Know-Nothing by L.W. Granger. Detroit, published by the Proprietor, 1854. A know-nothing, according to Wikipedia, was originally a secret society. And it says here, progressive in stances of issues of labor rights, opposition to slavery. It says, supported the expansion of rights of women, regulated industry, designed to improve the status of working people, the forerunner to the temperance movement. Says that it was originally a secret society. Says that the supporters of this movement believed in an alleged Romanist conspiracy was being planned to subvert the civil and religious liberty in the United States, and sought to politically organize native-born Protestants and what they described as a defense to their traditional religious and political values. See, it talks about their fears of the Catholic priests and bishops would control a large block of voters. What else does it say here? There's a couple other things that I thought were worth mentioning. The name came from, if people were suspected of being a member, they were to reply, "I know nothing." It said that it was alternative to the Democratic Party. It became the main alternative to the dominant Democratic Party. Okay. So in any case, obviously, probably not going to agree with everything in here. If there's anything that's overtly sinful, I will make a comment. Otherwise, I will try to focus and just read and not make a whole lot of commentary, because I find that's kind of frustrating when I'm trying to listen through an audiobook. So, here we go. Preface. In the pages following, I have honestly and faithfully endeavored to present to the reader, in as brief a manner as possible, some of the more plausible characteristics of Romanism in its various stages in progress, as it presents itself to my own mind. Now, remember to bear in mind this was written in 1854, so about 33 years short of 200 years ago. Okay. I have abstained from the introduction of obsolete words or quaint and antique forms of expression by simply confining myself to matters of fact. Whether it will appear to you a true condition of the affairs upon which it treats, or a tale of fancy or fiction, you, of course, must be the judges. Our whole object has simply been to present this all-important subject in its true light, to point out the many equivocalities under which Romanism is now laboring in this country. Equivocalities is equivocation, which means basically a pretense or a cover or using words deliberately to deceive, for the purpose of undermining the foundations of a government over which it has not and never can have control. That the people of our own government may protect their common schools from the interference of a Roman Catholic priesthood and their usurping the power invested in that system by converting it into a channel to be made subservient to their own predilections. To guard well that sacred institution, the ballot box, from all foreign control and invasion, by being made a tool for political purposes, by designing hands, or that means conspiring hands. In short, to discountenance every measure or system calculated to impair the institutions of our country. Everything has been told in a plain and comprehensive form, trusting that it may be an instrument not only of waking up the consciences of many who now look with indifference upon the scene around them, but at the same time be effectual in eradicating an evil from among us which sooner or later, unless checked, will prove disastrous to the American people in the ardent desire of the author. Is the ardent desire of the author. Detroit, August 1854. Now I would add that this is true of all nations, not just America, but America is the number one enemy of the papacy. The last bastion of freedom. So, continuing on, an appeal to the people of the United States of America. Fellow citizens, a great and important crisis is at hand! Exclamation point. The nation is convulsed to its very center! Exclamation point. Yet we look upon the calamity as one of ordinary interest. We remain unaroused from our slumbers, while the enemy stalketh abroad at noonday, quote unquote, laying his deep-seated foundations for plunder and conspiracy. For the past 20 years, it has been advancing with a rapidity unequaled and unparalleled in the history of nations. It has encroached upon the rights, not only of individuals, but of all that Americans hold sacred and dear. It has established a power among us fearful in its operations, and we may say almost uncontrollable, and all in the name of quote-unquote democracy. Wonderful name for a misguided people. But let us pause for a moment while we enter into the reflection of what seems to be the subject worthy of our attentive consideration. When we, as American citizens, contemplate the workings of our great, quote-unquote, democratic system of government, we seem to lose sight of that portion which relates to popular sovereignty. To have too little regard for the popular will of the people, so long as any particular object can be obtained, even at the sacrifice of right and principle! Exclamation point. Instead of clinging to the Constitution, that sheet anchor of our liberties, as the guiding star of our ambition for right, we look more earnestly to a system which, if preserved in, must inevitably be the downfall and ruin of a people whose life's fortunes and sacred honors have been dedicated to and baptized in the blood of freedom. Loudly do politicians harp upon, politicians that are as corrupt as the government itself. Fiercely do the halls of debate ring with the eloquence of our modern statesmen in vindication of our institutions and their republican simplicity, while their voices are but the death knell echoes of the ruin of a great and mighty empire. The pulse of the people has been tapped, while enormous evils and outrages have been perpetrated upon them by enemies of freedom, and all in the name of liberty. A fearful and momentous crisis, like a threatening cloud, darkens and hovers over our national escutcheon! Exclamation point. The slow but sure and effectual giant tread of pagan Romanism is fast inundating the foundations of our government. They are making new inroads upon her legislative action and fresh advances upon all her healthy and peaceable systems with an impudence unparalleled in the history of any country or nation in the world. Startle not, gentle reader, as we trace the fruits of this direful pestilence through its various stages as they now present themselves to the American people. As, quote, narrow-fiddled while Rome was burning, unquote, so may we expect to find many a miserable and worn-out politician and party hack aiding them in the wider extension and diffusion of their corrupt and nefarious designs upon some selfish and miserable promise of bribery and corruption! Exclamation point. What does Romanism demand? We answer in the first place, and that portion clothed with, quote, priestly authority, unquote, by, quote, division of all monies appropriated for the support of the common schools, unquote. For what object do they demand it? For the wider diffusion of Romanism throughout our land. And I would add that evolution, the evolutionary theory, the Big Bang, Copernicus' heliocentricity, all of these notions that form the social sciences today, taught in all the universities and public schools, were all created by the Jesuits. So, while this is not an overt form of Catholicism, it is a covert form of Catholicism that is being taught in all the schools today. They have knocked at the doors of our common schools for this object, and when refused admittance, a spirit of insubordination to our laws has been manifested on their part, and modes of violence resorted to in order to seek revenge. So originally the Bible was taught in the public schools. Public schools were the notion of Puritans. They set up the first public schools. And I believe it was a Roman Catholic Supreme Court judge, the name eludes me at the moment, that removed the Bibles from common schools, from the public schools. But to the shame of our government be it said, they have sought and received, quote, comfort and strength from the enemy. Arnold-like, Benedict Arnold, I assume, there are those who would sell and barter away the glorious heritage bequeathed to them by their ancestors for a mess of pottage, quote unquote, just so long as they were to receive the benefit to accrue therefrom. Their money and influence can be easily obtained, even for such a system, on the day of election, if they can only obtain their votes in return. What can we, as Americans, gain by such a policy? Nothing comparatively, nothing. But the ruin it produces. Politicians ask us in return, backed up by a Jesuitical priesthood. What, are you not going to tolerate religious freedom in your country? We answer and reply, yes. But we are determined not to thrust the Protestant Bible out of our churches and common schools in order to please the bigoted and besotted, B-E-S-O-T-E-D, pagan superstition. And of course all the churches, they have departed from the Protestant King James Bible. They're using a new translation based primarily on the Roman Catholic Westcott and Hort texts. We are by no means yet prepared to appropriate to your use money dedicated for the education of our children and those to come after them, to support the incendiary torch of Romanism. To our shores you are freely welcomed, but to the laws of our government you must submit as soon as your feet tread upon our soil! Exclamation point. If you cannot submit to our common schools system, you are at liberty to place your offspring under the control of one freely guaranteed to you by our government, in teaching them in schools where the Bible is excluded and where the public money is not expended. But further than this you cannot go. The mandate has gone forth. 'Tis the people's fiat. Beyond it you cannot pass. Wherever you have caused this question to be agitated and carried into the political arena, you have failed in accomplishing your designs. The policy of the government is fixed, and the decree cannot be altered. To its requirements you must acquiesce. None but a close and careful observer of governmental affairs can know or dream of the dangers to result from such an alarming evil. And of course, Martin Luther had many quotes about what the educational institutions, if they departed from the Bible, how the gates of hell would be open. It would be fatal to our common school system, wherever the wound was inflicted. If immigration is to increase in proportion to what it has for the past few years, we should lose all power and control over them in a very few years. Think about what's going on at the border now. But we are told that there is no danger, that it is a work of fanaticism, quote unquote. All this may be true, but the facts stare us too conclusively in the face to admit of such an argument. That several attempts have recently been made in Massachusetts, as well as in other parts of the country, to exclude the Bible from our public schools by Roman Catholic priests admits of no contradiction here. In the town of Holliston, in the above-named state, an attempt was recently made for that purpose. Before the tempest could be calm, a public meeting of the citizens was called for the purpose of deciding the question, which of course resulted in the negative. No sooner do we see this question settled there than we are again called upon to witness the spirit of Romanism and insubordination manifesting itself in the bitterest and most vindictive form. We give it below as we find it in one of the ablest journals of Boston, the B-E-E. Priestly interference. The Boston Bee states that in one of the schools in Salem, Massachusetts, a day or two since, a scholar refused to study one of the regular philosophy works because the priest told him not to. The teacher, having no fear for an impertinent and interfering priest, insisted on the study being pursued, whereupon the priest ordered the removal of the boy from the school. Comment is unnecessary. Yes, comments are unnecessary, and language is too futile to express the indignation which every American should feel at such attempts to subvert the high authority in all systems which have their origin in the government itself. But now, let us in turn look upon the other side of the question and compare the figures. It will not be found necessary for us to wade through a long train of suppositions to substantiate the position that we shall take. But let us at the outset come close to the mark. The plea that Romanism sets up in vindication of their alleged right for a division of the quote-unquote school money is on account of their loyalty to the Constitution and their obedience to the laws and support to the institutions of the country. Because a few brave and noble Irishmen left their homes and firesides to engage in the revolutionary struggle for freedom and securing our independence, must we in return forsake the government which we labor to defend by turning traitors and transmitting it with its sacred institutions into the hands of a people who, as the emissaries of bloody and bigoted Rome, are its bitterest enemies, thereby converting it into a Roman Catholic hierarchy? Exclamation point. Never! Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Never in all capital letters. Exclamation point. Exclamation point. Why should not Americans be as justifiable in their impositions upon the Romish government upon the ground of loyalty, or some other modern invention, by introducing into their schools the Protestant Bible, demanding the expulsion of not only their Bible, but all books, which was opposed to their belief in religion. Who can predict the end? Where would the Irish rebellion and insurrection cease? Would Romish bishops and priests of the Green Isle tolerate such an outrage on the part of Americans? Would not the scenes of the Reformation, when paganism was put to death, I'm going to reread the last couple sentences here. Would not the scenes of the Reformation, when paganism put to death every believer in the Protestant religion, again be reenacted? In other words, she's referring to the Roman Church and their persecutions of the Bible believers as paganism. Would they not howl over the defamation of their religion and sanctuary? Would not the victims of their wrath be scourged and imprisoned, nailed to the rack, burned at the stake, or roasted alive as a punishment for their crime, as they did in the Dark Ages? Oh yes, say we, but they can cross the Atlantic and come over among us too and commit as many depredations upon our government as they choose, because we have laws that do not forbid it. They can burn our churches and schoolhouses, murder and massacre American citizens in our streets in open day, cause all manner of outrages and deeds of violence to be committed upon our persons and institutions in consequence of their loyalty to the Constitution. Such is the language of their principal organ in this country, the Boston Pilot, a journal that Americans should never allow to be tolerated in a country which manifests such strong hostility to foreign influence. Its doctrines are full of bigotry and incendiarism, seeking to cause fires, ignite fires, I guess. They are unenlightened, dark, and damning, and determined not only to our institutions, detrimental not only to our institutions, but to the best interests of our common country. In order to show the vindictive spirit which that Catholic journal manifests towards our government, we give but one among 1,000 extracts that we might quote, and we ask for it a careful perusal. These Roman Catholic papers are under the entire control of, quote, bishop and priest, unquote, and are, of course, the embodiment of their malice and malignity towards Protestantism. Emigration. According to the Boston Pilot, the emigration from Ireland to the United States is fast decreasing. We are glad to hear it. The cruel and ungrateful manner in which Irishmen and their religion have been treated in the state for some time past should deter the sons of the Green Isle from going to what we are sorry to say is now a land of mob law, in which whatever became of the stars and stripes seemed to be reserved for the hapless children of the persecuted land. Far better for them to go to Canada or any other part of British North America except those plague spots in New Brunswick which are cursed by the fell spirit of Orangism. That was some sort of a secret society, Protestant secret society. William of Orange, named after William of Orange, Orangeman. In any case, continuing on. Notwithstanding, they style us as mob law land. Okay, so this is the author of this book commenting on that quote from the Catholic magazine. Notwithstanding, they style us as mob law land, and that too by a Roman Catholic paper printed in the city of Boston. They're at the same time allowed to apply the incendiary torch to one of the most sacred of our institutions, to kindle a fire in our midst that unless quenched, and quenched forever, before the fire be too far kindled, will throw up the crest of its desolating lava into a bloody and terrific revolution. We feel almost constrained to use the language of Franklin at the beginning of our revolution, when this spirit of wild fanaticism is bursting upon us. Quote, The sun of liberty is set. Americans must light their lamps, unquote. The national pendulum is already beating the alarm. A Roman Catholic clergy stand in the gap, like fiends from the nethermost hell, urging onward their ignorant and deluded followers to usurp the powers of the government under which they live as a reward for their loyalty to the Constitution since the days of the Great American Revolution. Exclamation point. Query. Exclamation point. In parentheses. How are they taught that the right to worship God according to the dictates of conscience is a privilege guaranteed to them by the Constitution of the United States? Do they learn it of themselves or through some other agency? What authority do they establish for their interference in the rights of others, as well as of the government itself? In our common school systems and all others held sacred by the American people and government. The fact is established beyond controversy that it is through the teachings of a popish priesthood whose orders are derived from a polluted and blood-stained Rome. Can it be presumed that a class of people who are continually kept in ignorance through the influence of a church system strictly enforced can know but little of the operations of a government founded upon an entirely different structure from that of their own? The fact being well established that Romanism teaches its subjects obedience to the government of the church and to be subjected to the authority of the priest under whom they serve and worship rather than a government of law and order. How can they, we repeat, be worthy the patronage and support of the government? Could the supposition be more preposterous to American citizens than that a class of human beings escaping from the most corrupt and oppressive government in the world, a class of people so indolent in themselves that they are unable to obtain an honest livelihood in their own country, are fit subjects to control a model government like that under which we are now living? The idea cannot be entertained for a moment. They are a people whom, we are sorry to say, are constantly kept in subjection to an infamous and base priesthood. Base meaning immoral. A system worse in itself than was ever demanded by the most bigoted and barbarous nation of the world. But we wish not to be misunderstood as at all objecting to their religion, but in their attempts to misuse and subvert the government of their adoption. It is on account of their interference with the government and its institutions that our objections are raised. The structure of this government is built upon broad and enlightened foundations. Its machinery is vast and complicated. Its operatives progressive and republican. Which is fascinating that this author here is using these terms side by side, progressive and republican. Now what have they done today? They've divided the American people into progressives or liberals and Republicans, which originally were in harmony. And that's what I've told some of my clients I work for that I've tried to tell. I said, look, the Bible says to be liberal and, obviously promotes conservative values, and, conservatives and liberals need to work together upholding the Constitution and defending us from a common enemy under the banners of liberty instead of, party politics and identity politics. We should be, progressive and Republican. This nation was a democratic republic. Both. Now they've got us divided, literally. Okay. How can such a government be carried forward in its simplicity by a people under the complete control of papacy and paganism, the tendencies of which are in diametrical opposition to the genius and spirit of our institutions? It never can with any degree of safety to ourselves or security to the country. Fellow citizens of America! Exclamation point. What a field for contemplation! Exclamation point. Are you not competent to imagine the affairs of a government of which you are the main pillars and embodiment? We are not yet willing to believe that you have fallen so low or degenerated so fast as yet to give up the demands made upon you by Romanism. Before your very eyes, in the light of day, is this spirit of insubordination and anarchy ripening into maturity. The storm cloud is brooding. Your enemies are marshaled on every hand. Let every American be on his guard against the relentless foe by securing well the battlements of his country's honor and integrity. This now brings us to another point of consideration. And in the first place, let us ask, why are these demands of Romish subserviency made upon the American people? We answer most reluctantly in consequence of our negligence and inactivity. Who would have whispered the idea 20 years ago that Roman Catholics in America would have sought for an appropriation of the public school fund for the education of their children in accordance with the teachings of their church discipline? Who would have supposed that they would have made an attempt to usurp the powers of the general government and interfere with the public and private rights of the people? And still further, who would have boasted of the supposition that, in the attempt of Americans to enforce the laws of the land, that such language as the following would have appeared in any public print in the country? But such gasconade, fellow citizens, appears in the Pope's organ, the Boston Pilot. Read it, and then pause for a reply. And here is the quote. We every day read of a congregation of the American order assembling for the purpose of insulting females, and even committing outrages upon them. This is a proof of the braggadocio, bravery of Americans. They have no manliness, no love of fair play. It is of no use reasoning with them. There are but two courses left, the most plausible of which is, and we believe, that it is the determination of many our Irish brethren to knock them down, or otherwise chastise them corporally. For should our Irishmen appeal to law for a redress, the odds are against him. For religious prejudices run so high in court with a Protestant judge and Protestant jury that the poor oppressed Irishman would be deprived of all just means of redress." Unquote. Such is the language of the Catholic journals from one end of the country to the other, and we ask Americans, if it is not high time to awake out of sleep. When our attention is drawn to such incendiary schemes, where is the American citizen to be found whose blood does not boil within his veins to seek redress from right quarter? But now let us inquire through whose influence these schemes emanate. Not by the poor, ignorant Irishman who has no knowledge of our laws, with the exception that, if he violates them, he stands convicted under the law. Neither do we believe that they come forward in their own strength, asking for an appropriation of the school money. No, such an invention would never have originated with an ignorant Catholic. Behind the curtain is concealed the secret. It is papal influence in all capital letters. A Roman Catholic bishop or priesthood! Exclamation point. Through the influence of this infernal machinery is the rights of the poor Irishman trodden underfoot and ground to powder. What the bishop tells them to do, they do through fear and dread of being cast into purgatory! Exclamation point. They are driven into the support of such systems in order to satisfy the demands that Popery is making upon the institutions of the United States. Descendants of the Pilgrims, Does not such an outrage upon your country enkindle anew in your veins the fires of the Revolution? I would add, you read Of Plymouth and Plantation by William Bradford, one of the Pilgrims, and one of the first history books ever written on American soil. And in the very first pages, he talks about the persecutions of the papacy and that sort of thing. Or are you slumbering at your posts in the assurance that all is well, quote unquote? The danger is all around you. It has not come upon you unawares, but the storm has been brooding for a quarter of a century. We're almost 2 centuries past the time of this writing. Can you imagine? The storm is here. COVID-19. The West, the mighty West, is a swift witness against you. From the shores of the Atlantic to the Pacific, along the banks of Ohio to the populous cities upon our lake shores, is one vast beehive of foreign population. With this tide of immigration rolls on in rapid succession battalions of Romish priests to first plant upon our soil its accursed institution. In the larger cities of the Union, they fill our jails, poorhouses, and prisons, and sow among us the seeds of death in its vilest forms. They are told, through their clergy, that they must not be content with the security the laws guarantee them in America, but that they must wage a ceaseless warfare with their institutions if they refuse to give them a due proportion of all public monies calculated to advance their interests and religion. Such are the fruits of Romanism, faintly pictured. Let the American people, but for a single day, give this God-accursed, God-forsaken, and damnable priesthood full power and control over his government. The torch of the incendiary would be applied to every house of public worship in the land that has not been consecrated to their use by the so-called holy water and other emblems of blasphemy, corruption, and rascality. I remember all of our last presidents, going back to Bush Jr., were educated at Jesuit institutions, or with the case of Obama, by the Jesuit priest Greg Galuzzo. And Obama had a Jesuit speechwriter. George Bush Jr. came from Yale University, was a member of Skull and Bones, which is the American branch of the Illuminati. Uses the skull and bones as its symbol, which was the flag of the Knights Templar, Roman Catholic military order. Your schoolhouses would be destroyed, and the Bible rifled out of its holy teachings and contents, and every bishop and priest howl with the joy of the smoldering and blackened embers. And just think, shut down all the churches, and even though the schools are all Roman Catholic now, public schools, de facto, not openly, they shut down all the schools too. So, every day and every hour proves but a confirmation of our assertion. But as we pursue the subject still further and give it fair investigation, we see the fire rage with more terror. We hear the crackling embers as they totter beneath the rubbish and ruin that it produces. But we remain unalarmed at the spectacle. In Cincinnati, the battle has commenced. The Roman Catholics have forfeited their churches by planting within them cannon and muskets. And for what? To shoot down American citizens who are determined, if there be any law and justice in the land or in the Constitution under which they live, to maintain the respect of their government at all hazards. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the Night of Columbus oath, it talks about storing weapons in the churches. Can it be possible in this enlightened age that American citizens will submit such an outrage should be imposed upon their country as to allow cannon and muskets to be stationed within the wall of a Romish cathedral to serve as the implements of death to American citizens? I would also recall, in case such a thing may seem implausible, defer to St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. If it has come to this, the sooner the fires of the Revolution are again kindled upon Bunkers Heights and Saratoga, the better. And of course, I disagree that war is ever the answer. If the war is to be carried into Denmark, quote unquote, and civil and religious liberty to be set at defiance through papal influence, God grant that the war may come soon. Planting cannon in churches by a banditti of Romish rebels in an American country! Exclamation point. Heaven save the goddess of liberty. Obviously, that's a blasphemy. Scarcely a day passes that some person is not knocked down as a, quote, know-nothing, unquote. And, of course, ironically, that is what conspiracy theorists are now essentially called. You're just a conspiracy theorist and know nothing. We're mocked for presenting these truths, very well documented truths, confirmed by Bible prophecy, too. The Times office has several times been set on fire. Consequence of the opposition shown the Catholics and their course towards the common schools. You too, fellow citizens, should be armed, ready for the conflict. And I say, amen, but spiritually and not physically. These are the judgments of God when our enemies, the enemies of liberty, advance. If we want to get right, we need to repent ourselves, get right with God, and teach others the truth, that they would repent and get right with God. And God will restore the land. 2 Chronicles 7:14, is it? You too should cause cannon and muskets to be stationed around you as fit emblems for your protection, and in order to protect your lives in the street and public highways of the land, carry your revolver and shoot down the first Irish rebel that dare insult your person as an American citizen. So yeah, obviously, totally disagree with that. But we're reading this for the history, to glean what we can glean. I've never even read this book or know anything about it. It's just something I had on my shelf. So, eat the meat and throw away the bones, as they say. This is the advice of the Boston Pilot to its Romish adherents. When the time has come within the history of our own government that the condition of our municipal offices is such that it is impossible to bring a Roman Catholic to justice and punishment, have we not something to fear and dread? The system of common education, as established by our patriotic fathers, is deemed the most sacred under the Constitution. Experience has shown that in the most enlightened condition of human society, any system of public education must have an adequate fiscal foundation. Such has been the fact in New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, which states have devoted large treasure to the support of common schools. Shall these treasures be withdrawn from their original channel and given away to the support of a system worse than paganism itself? No, thank God. Like faithful sentinels of your government, you have established that decree in your recent elections beyond a controversy. If, as native-born American citizens, that decree was settled through the influence of the, quote, know-nothing organization, or by an ardent attachment to the Constitution of your country, it matters not, for both are one in sentiment and flow through the same pure and crystal channel, both having their origin in the government. To no system in the world should Americans feel such an ardent attachment as that of common schools. Who can wonder when such encroachments are made upon that system by a class of citizens composed of the more miserable and ignorant serfs of Europe, that the blood of Americans should boil over with indignation? And if it becomes necessary to vindicate and protect that system, even at the point of the bayonet, they will find the American people have not degenerated so low and lost to all manner of respect for their institutions as to be found wanting to a sense of duty. It costs us but little to guard our liberties when endangered, and to what higher ambition can an American citizen aspire than to be a faithful sentinel of his country in the hour of danger? And so, I would say our duty is not to be ignorant. Like Paul said, we're not ignorant of the enemy, Satan's devices, to reprove the evil. Was it Ephesians 5:11? And expose the works of darkness. Education is the key. If people woke up, and repented, got right with God, the enemy would not be able to advance further. No need to take up arms. If as American citizens we are ever called upon to engage in a Roman Catholic rebellion, it will be at a time of unawares. Of course, nobody's aware anymore of this ancient battle between Christ and Antichrist. An hour when we are slumbering at our posts and dreaming of security. Fellow citizens, there is no security in the hour of danger. Our danger is not so much to be dreaded from outward foes as those from within. An outward foe can be met upon his own battlements in a fair and open flight, but an enemy at home is one much to be dreaded. This is it. That should nerve the American people to be more active and zealous in defense of their country and its institutions. What a day of desolation would that be to our country when the Bible was driven from our public schools and the children of American parents taught to worship a Romish priesthood. So this was obviously before the Bible was driven out of the public schools, which I believe was in the 60s, and I believe Earl Warren was the Supreme Court judge responsible for that decision, I believe. When the public monies bequeathed to the children of American parents by millions of now slumbering and sleeping patriots should be given for the education of such a hellish and abominable system. Can it be that it has come to this? We cannot believe it. We can do no better in closing our remarks upon this subject than in devoting a short space to the following extract of a speech delivered by the Honorable Joseph W. Savage of New York City in the New York Legislature on the 7th of April last. The common schools in that state still require protection by their friends in the legislature against the constant assaults of the priesthood of Rome. First, on the plea of a tender conscience and sectarianism, the Bible was excluded from the schools. Then they were called godless, and petition was made for a part of the school fund, that sectarian Romish schools might be established and maintained. Okay, so first, on the plea of tender conscience and sectarianism, the Bible was excluded from the schools. Then they were called godless, and petition was made for a part of the school fund, that sectarian Romish schools might be established and maintained. On the 7th of April, a bill was introduced into the legislature of that state providing that no school connected with any of the public or private asylums or societies of a sectarian or denominational character in the state, that no school under charge of any religious sect or denomination, or in any particular creed or doctrines are taught peculiar to any sect or church, shall receive any portion of the school money. The remarks of Mr. Savage should be printed throughout the land in letters of gold. Okay, so it sounds like maybe the Bibles were removed at this point in history for a time. It says, under the plea of consciousness, I guess, supposedly to the liberties of the Roman Catholics not to have to learn the Bible, and sectarianism, the Bible was excluded from the schools. In other words, they were saying your Bible is based on sects, Protestantism, and it's not conscious of our civil liberties as Catholics, so it must be removed. And then once they were removed, because the legislature gave in to that, then the Catholics evidently called the schools godless, and then they were able to make the petition for the school funds in order the public school funds of the states to make their own sectarian Romish schools. If I'm understanding correctly his argument. Okay, so here it looks like a quote from this legislation. Sir, our common schools are places wherein the children of all our people meet. They study together, they play together, they associate together upon a common level. They come to understand and know each other, assimilate in morals, in tastes, and in habits. A sort of brotherhood is established, fraternity of feeling promoted, and a foundation for a life of liberality and kindness towards each other is laid. The importance of this consideration is not, I fear, sufficiently appreciated. Its influence is measureless in giving practical effect to that spirit of universal toleration which breathes through all our institution and speaks in all our laws. I know well that our common schools have been denounced as godless and infidel by a denomination that arrogates to itself all the wisdom, all the truth, and all the piety of the world. I know they have been thus denounced because they do not teach a blind and unquestioning obedience to the priesthood, because they do not inculcate the doctrines of Rome as a primary element of education. Sir, the children educated by these funds are to be the future sovereigns of the country. They are to wield the destiny for good or for evil of the state. What kind of education should they have to fit them for the exercise of this power and these duties? No one, I presume, will deny the proposition that it should be historical and moral. Upon these three propositions, all will unite. The history taught should be authentic. It should be the truth. It should not be fashioned or shaped to meet the views of any sect, nor to promote or screen any particular denomination. Nor should it be arranged with a view to prejudice or wipe out any stain from the character of any man, or combination of men, or from any institution that belongs or has passed into history. In other words, under the guise of political correctness, we should not be mentioning Rome's history of blood, the Church of Rome. It is said there is a Christian sect in this state, large in numbers, whose conscience will not consent to the Bible being read in the schools. I am fully aware of this, that it is from this sect that the commotion which ended in the exclusion of the Bible from our common schools originated. Sir, I claim that I am not a bigot, that I am not intolerant, that I would render equal and exact justice to all sects and creeds. But when the Roman Church in its pride and exclusiveness claims that its conscience alone shall be respected, and that its prejudices and tastes shall alone be consulted, I answer that this is a Protestant country. That there are in this union over 20 millions of Protestants and 2 million Catholics. That there are 10 Protestant parents in this state to 1 Catholic parent. These 10 parents desire the Bible should be read in the schools. Their consciences are offended because of its exclusion. Whose consciences shall be consulted? Shall these 10 Protestant parents, men to the manner born, be overruled to satisfy the one whose conscience, framed upon the platform of a sect, is too tender to permit the simple word of God to be read in the hearing of his children? Is there equality or justice in this? Sir, in a republican government, majorities must rule. They must rule in the schoolhouses as well as the polls and in these halls." Unquote. Having now traced the effect of Romanism through its various stages as affecting our public schools, we are led to inquire, what is our duty as American citizens? To the real lovers of the country, those who bow with a single heart to the shrine of true liberty? Can we discern? We will glance and see. This is one, to wrest the nation and its destiny from the iron hand of party, which does not seek its highest good and best development. There we go, warning about the party spirit. Washington and Jefferson warned about a two-party democratic system too, like we have today, Democrats and Republicans. It is shackled, bent over, and almost stifled by party. Good men see this, and seeing are combining to bring about a better state of things. Demagogues, always a rotten, false, dangerous faction, never patriotic, never with the people, never on the side of right, of God, of country, have ruled the land till it has been ruled almost out of house and home, reason and reality. A lesson of the day, a deep, solemn, stern lesson, is the overthrow of corrupt parties and corrupt politicians. Another, to overthrow that church that seeks to gain secular power. A church that was born in Rome, that was built on lies, is perpetuated by superstition, is sustained by tyranny, and the enemy of all that is republican and democratic. The church is among us. It is growing. It grows because there are loose men among us who come over in immigrant ships, who wear the cross, who go to the priest, who beget crime, who commit offenses against the law, who do all that is damning, and all sanctioned by this same church. It is this church, insolent and infamous, that makes the heart and brain ache to think of, that has crushed liberty where it has had the power, that makes nations poor and miserable, that takes out their lifeblood, their manhood, that machines humanity, turns into machines, that drives out God with God, blasphemy on its lips. It is to root this, root and branch. That is a lesson of the day, and an earnest lesson. Still another, to stem the tide of emigration that is stocking our fair land with crime and criminals, with paupers and poorhouses, with all that leaches out our substance and burden and weighs down our prosperity. We need to warn the stern fact that this emigration, while it adds to the numerical force of the country, also adds to the strength of its enemies. To reach the great evil, public sentiments must compel the leaders to stay all riotous proceedings, which it is sufficiently well known they can always and easily do by simply raising a finger or issuing a command. With such official orders, there will be no interference with the right of speaking or preaching, a right which every American must and will maintain peaceably if they can, forcibly if they must. It is a liberty that the Pope execrates, quote unquote, and his followers curse, and therefore should be upheld. For if this concession should be made, it would only be followed up by the racks and tortures of the Holy Inquisition, quote unquote. The American movement for American safety is equally a measure of safety to all foreigners. All are equally interested in the welfare of this republic, especially the immigrant who seeks here a refuge from oppression, an asylum for his children. They must come forth to protect the institutions that protect them, and aid in sustaining our liberties, our laws, and the free schools, the great source of light, virtue, and intelligence. Let us now in the second place inquire, what further does Romanism demand? The answer is plain and easily furnished. It demands our public authorities the erection of convents and nunneries for underground walks to these dens of hell and infamy, temples dedicated to Romish infidelity and corruption, fit emblems of purgatory. Why the demand for these underground walks for priest and nun to travel? Why will our civil authorities sanction such an outrage to be perpetrated in these enlightened days? Here you have the answer. Because you permit foreigners to hold responsible offices of trust in the place of native-born Americans, and such will be the case just so long as outrages are tolerated. So we're going to leave off there. It's page 21 of this book.